Hey, Cyndi. Tommy Givens here, professor of the course. Welcome. Great to have you. Wanted to send along a video reply here in week one as we kind of get our conversation started. Gives me a chance to say hello and welcome a little more directly and also give you some feedback on what you've written in both response forums here in week one, which is excellent, by the way. Love what you have highlighted, and I want to cut right to what you are emphasizing, I think, in the response forum one, which is that the promises of God to Israel, as you say, are unconditional, fundamentally grounded in God's sovereign will and purpose. And then you go on to sort of develop this idea, especially through the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah. But it's a really key insight because it challenges an imaginary that I think is widespread in Christianity and one that kind of lurks in some of our own interpretive impulses sometimes as we read Matthew and other parts of the Bible. And that is to think of the people of God as this idealized entity where people belong insofar as they believe the right thing or uh, obey enough, comply, are righteous or just enough in the way that they live. And then supposedly, when people don't believe the right thing or they are unjust by some extreme degree, then they are cut out of the people of God. They don't count. They're disinherited. God supposedly abandons them or they remove themselves, we might say. And this is just not true to the memory of Israel as we have it in the Bible, or I would say to teaching in Matthew. And so you've set us up well, I think, to track with the way that whatever consequences the people of God might endure because of how they live when they live unjustly, God does not give up on them. They are able to retain their memory as the people of God over generations, even as some might be assimilated, absorbed by other peoples. Those who remember the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as their God, they remain the people of God in the world. And that's an important, I think, corrective to this tendency in the Christian imagination to idealize the people of God. And this is going to play out importantly in Matthew's gospel because key to who Jesus is someone who embraces his people in their sins, their difficulties. He joins them in the waters of baptism at the Jordan by John. It's a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. Jesus doesn't stand aloof from that, but wades into those waters as well and insists on knowing his people's sins only as his own. And that is, I think, key to who he is. It's, of course, what occasions his being anointed as Messiah, the ultimate human heir of God's ruling power on the earth, the Son of God. And so that's not an incidental kind of ingredient in who Jesus is. It's going to carry him throughout the story into all kinds of complicated relationships and finally to really shameful and public death that is in solidarity with uh, what his people are facing as a consequence of how they have lived over generations, but especially his own generation. He doesn't despise that future, but makes it his own and then makes life out of that horrifying death in resurrection. So that's really crucial to who Jesus is as Messiah and therefore what it means to be his disciples. His disciples are all going to desert him. We're all variously unfaithful to Jesus, but he doesn't forsake them. He remains with them and does the same with us. He speaks against their tendency to compete with one another over who is the most righteous, who is the most faithful, who is the most just, or whatever. And in that way, he's warning us against that same temptation to play rivals to one another in our witness to the kingdom that comes from heaven and fills our communities and our world by God's gifts. So, you just got some great insight, I think, here that has set us up to track with this drama of who Jesus is in relation to who Israel is, all of which is a matter of who God is in our world in Matthew's gospel. You continue this theme, I think, in the second response forum with the genealogy and what it evokes. Um, I like how you talk about the mothers of Jesus that are highlighted in the genealogy as bringing, your words here, a layer of complexity and grace to the narrative. None of these characters can be reduced to one category or one incident in their life. The Christian tradition, by the way, has tended to sort of accentuate the sexual questionableness or deviance, even of their stories, and then to build God's grace on the back of that. And I think that the Jewish tradition on this score has been more sound because it actually follows the biblical memory of these Gentile mothers of King David, and then, as we know, of Jesus as well, by highlighting their courage, the fact that they used the sexual power of their bodies to advocate for themselves when they were being mistreated, for their families, for their future. It doesn't actually um, sort of cast aspersions or throw shadows over them in the memory of their lives because they were driven to prostitution or that sort of thing. And in the case of the wife of Uriah, as she's named, I would say in the Bible, she's presented as really a survivor of rape, not as someone who courted an adulterous affair. And then, of course, David murders the husband of hers that we are told was a virtuous man. So, um, the wife of Uriah that we know as Bathsheba is not sort of remembered as someone who uh, kind of entered into a illicit sexual union with the king. This is not the kind of proposition she could have said no to in her circumstances, from what we can tell. And so it's actually a case of rape by the most celebrated king in Israel's history. And this is actually the moment that the author of Matthew highlights for us, coupling David the king, as he's named in the genealogy, with what is arguably the most shameful moment in his reign, where he does what he does to this vulnerable woman, but then proceeds to murder her husband, and a whole cascade of sins kind of falls out of this terrible undoing, leads to all kinds of trouble in David's reign, etc. So, uh, just to your point, that each of these characters is a complex whole that can't really be reduced to one category or incident, and that adds a reach to the genealogy and therefore to the story that it introduces of Jesus. And it sets us up to be more attentive to some of the particulars of the narrative that then unfold, starting with Jesus's own mother, who would be uh, a teenage pregnancy, bears a child, conceives a child out of wedlock in apparent adultery against her fiance, Joseph. The story gives us a little more insight into how she conceived Jesus, but it doesn't indicate that she had any way of proving that to people. And we can only assume that no one would believe some teenage girl saying that she was impregnated by the Spirit of God. So Jesus is born of what will be perceived as an illicit affair, and um, sort of grows up under that shadow in his community. And this is how God chooses to father a child that is to be known as the Son of God and the Son of David. And that should hopefully affect our perception of teenage pregnancy, of the way children come into our world, often in circumstances that we might find to be shameful for whatever reason. And these are stories and lives and bodies and people that this narrative is urging us to consider more carefully, more patiently, more open-endedly, at just taking into account what God can and does do through such lives and such difficulties. Continues on later in the story with a encounter between Jesus and a Canaanite mother, like his own Canaanite mothers in Matthew 15. The witness of the wife of Pilate, another Gentile woman in the story. So there's a whole slew of characters and scenes that are anticipated by the way the genealogy evokes memories of Israel's past, David's past, the memory of the kingdom. And hopefully that kind of uh, makes us attentive in a way we might not otherwise be to what Matthew is teaching us. So looking forward to exploring all of that with you in the weeks ahead, and thankful for your good work here in week one. Looking forward to the conversation. I think I mentioned in the intro forum that we are going to hold an in-person class every Thursday for anybody in the LA area that wants to join, and it'll replace some online work. I'm not sure if your job allows for that sort of thing in the middle of the day on Thursdays. There'll also be some optional Zoom discussions that'll be live in case that works better for you. But hope that we'll be able to connect in a variety of ways throughout the term, and looking forward to studying Matthew with you. Welcome.